In addition to Women's History Month, March 25th marks the 100th anniversary of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. 146 garment workers, mostly women, died in the fire. This incident led to widespread reforms for workers. Tammy Cozier investigates the continuing legacy.
Until 9/11, the Triangle Fire was New York's deadliest workplace disaster. The 17-minute blaze broke out in a lower Manhattan garment factory in 1911. Serphin Maltese was born 21 years after the fire, but still feels its impact today. His grandfather, Serafino, lost his wife and 2 daughters in the fire.
He had come over first in 1906 from Sicily, and then after a year sent for his family, and his wife then, Caterina, came with her two sons, Paul, who was my father, and Vito, who was my uncle, and 3 daughters, Maria, who was 4, Lucia, and Rosaria.
Many immigrant women worked in the garment industry despite long hours and poor conditions. The Maltese women were no different. The Triangle factory space was cramped and pay was low, and its owners locked the doors and blocked stairways to prevent stealing. When the fire flared, Caterina, Lucia, and Rosaria weren't able to escape. Serafino had now lost all the women in his family, including Maria, who had died on the passage from Italy to Ellis Island.
He loses his youngest daughter in 1907, and then 4 years later he bids goodbye to his wife, Caterina, and the 2 daughters to go to work, and then never sees them again except for identifying the bodies of his 2 daughters and ultimately identifying the body of his wife.
Lucia, 14, and Rosaria, 18, died from smoke inhalation. Maltese's grandmother was one of 7 badly charred, unidentifiable bodies buried at Brooklyn's Evergreen Cemetery.
The people that were still looking for lost relatives, like my grandfather, would look through their belongings. And finally, he had realized, he saw the ring that she had, and then contacted the authorities and contacted the people at Evergreen Cemetery.
Caterina was reinterred at Calvary Cemetery in Queens. The other 6 victims remain unknown until last summer. That's when amateur genealogist Michael Hirsch discovered who they were after combing through newspaper clippings and vital records. All that remains at the site of the fire is a commemorative plaque. The building is now owned by New York University. Today, it's filled with students rather than garment workers. Lab equipment has replaced sewing machines. But just down the street is an exhibition created by Dr. Lucy Oakley, public historian Marcy Reven, and a team of NYU students marking the anniversary. It begins with a workers' strike 2 years before the fire to demand better safety.
Somewhere between 20,000 and 40,000 garment workers, mostly young women, went out on strike. The strike started in November of 1909, and it was mostly over in February. Most of the garment workers were able to settle with their shops. However, the Triangle factory was the largest and most successful, and so it had the deepest pockets, and they were able to hold out.
The Triangle fire galvanized public support for unions.
Unionized workers were in a better position and were more likely to be safe because they had a voice. And when the public realized that, the tide began to turn more in favor of unions. So the fire had a great impact.
The exhibit concludes with a call for increased worker protection.
We end pointing out that workers in illegal sweatshops in New York City and all over the world are still working under conditions that are not that dissimilar to the conditions that led to the Triangle fire.
The Maltese family wants to make sure conditions at the Triangle factory and victims of the fire aren't forgotten.
It turned out we had this original plot that my grandfather had owned, and we never knew about it. There are 37 victims of the Triangle fire buried in Calvary Cemetery. So my family and I are donating the plot. We're going to have a monument with all 37 names of everybody buried in Calvary.
Tammy Cozier for 219 West.